Okay, continuing on, we have now completed the. Let me just get rid of my PowerPoint here. So we've now completed the schema for our other tables. Now we have to work on the first set of tables, right? The real tables for our project here. So let's go back to our college scores card. Actually, I only have these up right now, so we have to open. I'm going to open up my file system, and amongst all these files, we have our scorecard, the actual data, right? So we opened this up the first time. So let's take a look at this actual data. And actually, before we do that, let's look at the data dictionary, right? So if we look at the data dictionary, what I need to do in the data dictionary is we have to prepare this data for that script. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to close this and open up my other file here. Let me So this is my file. So what you're going to do is get rid of all the filters that you had before, right? So all these little filters up here. Make sure that everything is selected. So we're seeing all the records here. Add a column in the front. I know it seems kind of silly, but I don't know. My little script that I whipped up, it's going to ignore the first column for some reason. I don't really care to figure out why. If you want to debug my script, go to town or make a better one. By all means, go ahead and make a better one. But just add a column in the front just as a buffer. Somehow how it mashes together the arrays, it gets screwed up. But again, this is just like any good DBA. I'm being pragmatic here with my time, and we just want to get this done, right? All right, so we're going to add that column. The rest of the stuff can remain the same, but you're going to save just this tab, right? We don't need all the other tabs, but you're going to save this tab as CSV. So you're going to go to File, Save As, save it as a CSV. So in my case, I called it college scorecard underscore data dictionary.csv. So I had the other tables CSV. Now I'm going to create the data dictionary CSV. So once you save that, and I can close this one, I don't need it anymore. So once you get that saved, we're going to come back over here. We're going to copy it up to the server. So I have the command already set up here. So on my system, I have it under PA 4.1 files, college scorecard data dictionary. I'm going to copy it into 4.1 on my server. All right, it's copied up on my server. And in fact, if I come over here just to make sure, right, there it is right there, the data dictionary file. Okay, so now that I've got that stored up on my server, my next step is I am going to add some lines to the code here. So what we're going to do is first we have to read that file in and create an array just like we did with the other example. I just put a comment here just to separate. So this is the stuff we did before, and I'm doing it all in one file, right? So there's my file, but I have to add PA 4.1 because that's where my file is, right? PA 4.1 college scorecard data dictionary. So that's going to create my little data dictionary. The next step, very similar to what we did before, right? This is almost exactly the same thing. We're going to, we have to build, we have to build the schema out. So we're going to do it almost the same way. A little simpler this time, right? In fact, I'll take these comments out because we really don't need these. I was just kind of playing around here. But again, the dev category is going to be the table name this time. So if you recall, the dev category was like school, root. There was a couple different ones. Those are going to become our tables. And then the variable name is going to become is basically the column names. So we have a table. The tables are going to have column names, and each of those columns is going to have a data type and a comment. That's really all we need, right? So for each table is going to contain all of the different column names. That's what variable name is. It's really just the column name from that other table, and the data type is what data type it is. Once we get that done, so once we have that all created, we're going to do a couple different things here. First, let's just create a string. That's going to be our placeholder to hold, this create statements that we're going to create. If you recall, there was only really a couple different data types. There was only 3 real data types in that data that we saw in the data dictionary. There was integer, there was float, and then there was string and some other stuff. But I'm just going to treat everything as a varchar. But if it's set to integer, then we're going to use int in our create statement. If it's float, I'm going to use float 20 comma 10. How did I come up with 20 comma 10? That means we get 20 digits long with up to 10 digits for precision. If it's any bigger than that, it'll just round it. And that should be good enough. And we could always go back and tweak that later, right? So if this is way too big, we can do some analysis on our data, and we can kind of window that back down to what we need. All right, so continuing on, the next step, I am going to actually create the table here. So let me, this is going to be a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to try to break this down for you in parts. So first, for each table, just like before, we're going to get the table and then a list of columns. If the table name is not blank and it's not completion, I'll tell you why I did this. The completion table is huge. There's thousands of rows or there's going to be thousands of columns in that table. I don't think we really need that table, so I'm taking it out, right? I'm making the executive decision that all the other tables are pretty useful, but completion, that's coming out. We're probably going to add that in later in another unit. We're going to play with some other different data types where it might be more appropriate to use that completion data as a dynamic column, for example. So we might come up with a different way to deal with that. So for right now, we're going to skip it, and we'll probably come back to that in another unit later on in the course. All right, so once I do that, we're going to start our create statement, right? Remember, we have our carriage returns here with the /n, create table, whatever the table name is. Again, that's coming from, that's the dev category, right? So that's coming from dev category. Then we're going to create our primary key first. So it's going to be, that's going to be dynamic, right? We're just going to create, it's going to be the table name underscore ID. We're creating our own primary key because we don't know what those primary keys are in the data that we got. We're going to create our own. So it's going to be an int, not null, auto increment. And then if the table is not equal to root, we are going to create a column called OPEID. So what this is, if you look at your data, every record has an OPEID, which I'm assuming is unique. Hopefully it's unique to each one of those records. So all the different tables we're going to create, they're all going to have an OPEID so that and that's going to be a foreign key. So that's what references here means. That means it's a foreign key referencing the root table and its OPEID. And that's why I'm saying if the table is not equal to root, because if it is the root table, it's already going to have an OPEID and it's already going to be a column. So I don't need to create it. It's already there. All of these other tables that get created are going to reference back to root. So the root is, and if you look at the data that we got from opendata.gov, you're going to see that there's this root which has the basic information about the colleges, and then all the other tables are stuff that describes the colleges and these different these different tables, which are the dev categories. So basically each category gets its own table, and it's going to reference back to that OPEID. All right, so we got that. So now we have our primary key, which we're going to create. We've got this foreign key that we're going to create, right? So that creates our primary key and our foreign key, which is going to reference the other table. Once we get that done, now we can start the next section. So I'm going to try to explain this as I go here. I'm going to keep a count on the number of columns that we create for each table, right? That way we can, at least we know what happened here, right? We know how many columns are in all these tables. So for each column in the table, right? So here we have a table that has columns. And then for each one of those columns, I'm going to generate this statement. So if the data type is equal to integer, then the data type is going to be integer. If it's float, then I'm going to make it a float data type. And if it's something else, it's going to be varchar 2048. And 2048 is huge, right? That's probably way more than we need, but at least that way we're not going to get any errors, and we can always window it down later. All right, the next step. So if this column is a foreign key, right? So if I find it in the other tables, right? That's why I left all this other code here, right? So this other tables, it's all still going to be here so I can reference it. And if I go look in the other tables and I find that column exists, that means it's a foreign key to one of those other tables I already created. So that means when we do the create statement, got to make sure we have references, and we're referencing that other table that we already created earlier, right? So it's going to be in there because we already created it earlier. Otherwise, if it's not there, then we are going to just create the item as normal. Now notice here for the comments, I am limiting the comments to 1024. So I'm using substring to keep the comments under 1024. And I'm also stripping out any single quotes because that's going to ruin our day if there's any single quotes in there. All right, so that's going to check to see if it's a foreign key and create the column if it is a foreign key with the reference. If not, it's just going to create it. And then when we're done, we're going to close that if. So let me just put our next lines in here. Oops. So this has to come back a little bit. All right, so we're going to close the if statement. We're going to increment the columns count, right? So each time it creates a column, this is going to get incremented. And then when it's done, it's going to exit that for each loop, right? So once it's done, we're out of that for each loop. And then we just have to close this all up. So let me, so we're going to add an extra column for year because we have lots of different years that we can import. We're just going to start with the first year, right? But we could always import all the other years and make a huge database if we wanted to. And then we can kind of compare different years or do all kinds of neat things. And then finally, I have to add the reference to the primary key, right? So this is going to be our primary key. Make sure that the database engine is set to InnoDB. The default character set is going to get set. I don't have a comment on the table. I think they're kind of self-evident. And then that's it. And then down here, the last thing it does is we're going to output the number of columns, right? So I keep incrementing this variable so I know how many columns it created. So at the very end, it's going to give us a listing of all the tables that it outputs a create script for and how many columns should be in each one of those tables. And then when that's done, that should be it, right? So that should create the schema for all of those tables, the main tables in our database. So what we're going to do, we're going to come back over here. Oh wait, we have to save this, right? Save it, and you have to upload it back to the server, right? In order to try it. So we're going to come over here. All right, we're going to run this. It looks like it worked, right? The root table has 5 columns, school has 41, admissions has 25, 228, 113, so forth and so on. Assuming we did this right, we should be able to run MySQL. Let's use VI. Take a look at it. So it's going to be create. What do we call it? Let's go back to the script here. Oh, we forgot. We have to output this to a file. It's not going to do anything unless we actually create a file, right? So, and mine's going to be PA 4.1. Yours may not be, right? I trying to stay organized here. So let me go back. I'm going to run this command again. Hopefully this is, there it is. Good, so we got it. I'm going to insert use college scorecard. Exit out of VI. Hope you remember how to do that from the last time. All right, so now we're going to run our SQL script again. And this isn't other tables, this is the real tables. Oh, it's create tables, sorry. So we're going to run create tables. It did something, right? So let's come back over here. We've got, a list of tables over here. We're going to refresh this. I should see a root table, right? So if this worked, there's main, there's region, there's school, there's root, there's repayment, student, tribal, women only, right? So all these extra little columns that we should have, right? And if we want to make sure, we could actually go through and check each one, right? If we come back over here, we should have a root, a school, admissions, and academics. So let's check for admissions and academics. There's admissions and academics right here and right here. And coming back over here, we should see student, cost, and aid, and repayment and earnings. Student, cost, aid, repayment, and earnings. So student, repayment, school, earnings. There it is, right? So they're all there. So we're good. And in fact, if we double click on this, we can see our list of columns, right? There's the OPID, right, which is going to reference that other table. Now, because we put the references in there, and this is going to be your deliverable for this section, is in MySQL Workbench. It's going to be kind of interesting. We're going to go to, and we should be able to do this. So let me try this real quick. So let's see if this works. If you go to File, you click on New Model. This is kind of a neat little tool we have in here. So under New Model, we're going to, I think we can just look at one of our existing schemas. So if we look at, all right, so I think I steered you wrong here. So if we go into database and then reverse engineer, so you can create a diagram. So if you go to new model, that lets you model your database as an ER diagram, and then it will generate the code for you. So you could create your ER model right in, in the management or in the MySQL Workbench, sorry. But if we go to reverse engineer, let's see if this works. So we're going to go, I'm just going to connect it to my server, right? And I think all this stuff should be saved, right? So I'm just going to click on next. So it's going to connect. I'm going to put my password in. It's going to retrieve a list of the schema from the database. So once that's done, I'm going to click on next. This is the database that I want to reverse engineer. So I just click on it and it's going to get a list of objects. And then we're going to click next. So I'm just going to do all the objects, right? So we're going to import all the objects into our diagram. I'm going to hit next. And like magic, there it is. There's our diagram, right? And in our diagram, I don't know if it, yeah, so interestingly, this diagram, even though we have our foreign key references, it did not show them in here, right? So we could add those foreign key references, right? We could add them, but I think if we do this a different way, so I'm going to try something here. Since we put them in here, I'm going to close this ERR diagram, and instead, I'm going to download. So let's do this. We're going to download our diagram. So mine's going to be easy to download because I'm just going to come over here. And you could download yours with SCP, right? You could do it either way, but I'm just going to download it this way. And I'm going to save it as create tables. So now if I come back over to MySQL Workbench, I'm going to do a new model. And I think if we come over here, we can open up we can import a SQL script. I'm going to come in here and open this one. Place my objects on my diagram. Execute. Next. Finish. And now, because we used the actual script that has our foreign key references, you can see that it's giving me a real ER diagram. So what I'd like you to do for this next section is try to make this diagram look as nice as you can. I know it's kind of hard. So you can actually hit the little arrow to kind of collapse these, to move these around. Um, there we go. So try to make this diagram look nice, just like your other diagrams, right? You've got plenty of space in here. You can move these around. You can make it as big as you want. And when you're done, just make sure you expand these so that we can see all the columns. It's going to be a pretty big diagram. But when you're done, you're going to come over here and you are going to go to, let's see, export. So go to export, and you're going to export this as a, well, probably a PNG is probably going to be the easiest thing. Whatever you want to export it as long as I can view it. I think a PNG is going to be easiest. And just paste it into a Word document. All the deliverables, they're all going to be screenshots. Just put them in a Word document. But export that as a PNG. So I'm going to export mine right now, even though it doesn't look very pretty. I'm going to call it PA 4.1C since it's the third deliverable. And if I go and look in here, I should see it, right? I double click on it. And I've got an image in there, right? I'm going to drag it over here for you. There we go. Again, mine doesn't look very pretty because I didn't move them around, but move them around, make it look pretty, and that's what you're going to turn in for this next part of the assignment. All right, and again, all of yours are going to look a little different because you're all going to put these tables in different places and so forth. Lots of different ways to do it. All right. So I'm going to stop this video, and then there's going to be one more video where we're going to import the actual data, right? So the last step is to actually import our data.